It was an ordinary evening like any other, the kind where the familiarity of routine brought a comforting sense of stability. I was lounging on the couch, immersed in a book, when Joyce entered the room with an air of palpable anxiety that I didn't immediately register. She sat down beside me, and I could sense her unease even before she spoke. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice wavering. I looked up, concerned, closing my book and giving her my full attention. Her next words hit me like a sledgehammer. I've met someone." I stared at her, uncomprehending, the words echoing in my mind. "What do you mean, you've met someone?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder would shatter the fragile world I had thought we shared. She took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. "After almost 7 years of marriage, I've been seeing another man," she confessed. The room seemed to tilt around me as I struggled to process what she had just said. "How long has this been going on?" I managed to ask, my voice strained. Joyce looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "A few months," she admitted. "I didn't plan for this to happen, it just did." The realization of her betrayal sank in, and I felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under me. "How could you?" I demanded, anger and hurt mixing in my voice. Honesty was supposed to be the foundation of our relationship. Joyce's tears began to flow, and she nodded, her voice trembling. "I know, David. I know. But I didn't realize how lonely I felt until—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Until what?" I prompted, my anger rising. "Until you found someone else?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, and I regret it every day. I was wrong, David. So wrong." The distance between us felt insurmountable as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, the weight of her confession hanging heavily in the air. "We've been meeting secretly," she continued, her voice barely audible. "It started innocently, but then—" I cut her off, unable to bear hearing the details. "But then it became more than that," I said, my voice cracking. She nodded again, her face a mask of sorrow. "Yes, I'm so sorry, David. I never wanted to hurt you." The pain of her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "You already have, Joyce. You already have," I said, struggling to keep my emotions in check. As the conversation grew more intense, I stood up, pacing the room, trying to make sense of the chaos that had suddenly erupted in my life. "So what's your plan now?" I demanded. "Continue this affair?" Joyce looked down, her hands trembling. "No. I was thinking of going away for a while," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I stopped pacing and stared at her, incredulous. "Going away? With him?" She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, to Las Vegas." The mention of Las Vegas felt like another blow. "Las Vegas? Are you out of your mind, Joyce?" I yelled, unable to contain my anger. She stood up, trying to explain herself. "I thought it might give us both some time to think, to figure things out," she said, pleading. "Figure things out? By running away with another man?" I retorted, the disbelief evident in my voice. "I need space, David. I need to clear my head," she said, desperation creeping into her tone. "You're not running away to clear your head. You're running away from your responsibilities," I shot back, the tension between us reaching a boiling point. The emotional intensity of the situation peaked as I looked her in the eye, my voice trembling with emotion. "If you go to Las Vegas, don't bother coming back," I said, my heart breaking with each word. Joyce broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "David, please," she begged, but I cut her off, my voice cold and unyielding. "No, Joyce. You need to decide right now, him or our marriage." She continued to cry, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I don't know, David. I don't know what to do," she sobbed. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Well, you better figure it out soon," I said, my voice filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. In a moment of resolute finality, I left the room and returned with our marriage license. Without a word, I placed it in a small coffin-shaped box that we had once bought as a joke. "This is what your betrayal has done to us," I said, placing the box on the table. Joyce looked horrified, her face a mask of pain. "David, no," she whispered, but I was resolute. "It's over, Joyce. Our marriage is dead." As I turned away, I heard her fall to her knees, clutching at my hand. "Please, David. I made a mistake. I realize that now. Please don't end us like this," she begged, her voice filled with desperation. I hesitated, the depth of her remorse tugging at my heart. "How can I trust you again, Joyce?" I asked, the pain in my voice evident. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I'll do anything, David. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I can't lose you," she said, her voice firm despite her tears. I stood there, torn between my anger and the love I still felt for her. "It's going to take a lot more than words, Joyce. A lot more," I said, my resolve wavering. She nodded, determination in her eyes. "I'll prove it to you, David. Just give me one more chance," she pleaded. I looked at her, the woman I had loved for nearly 7 years, and felt the stirrings of hope. "We'll see, Joyce. We'll see," I said, my voice softening. In that moment of raw emotion and vulnerability, I realized that while the road ahead would be difficult, there was a glimmer of possibility for us to rebuild what had been broken. As we sat in the dimly lit living room, the air thick with tension, the gravity of Joyce's confession hung over us like a dark cloud. I struggled to maintain my composure, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. Joyce had betrayed me, and the pain was almost unbearable. But amid the hurt and anger, there was a desperate need to understand how our relationship had reached this breaking point. "Honesty was supposed to be the foundation of our relationship," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and frustration. Joyce nodded, tears streaming down her face, her guilt and regret palpable. "I know, David. I know. But somewhere along the way I lost sight of that. I didn't realize how lonely I felt until I met him." The admission cut deep, and I felt a surge of anger. "How could you not realize you were lonely?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why didn't you talk to me about it?" Joyce's sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. "I was scared, David. I didn't want to burden you with my feelings. You were always so busy, so wrapped up in your work. I felt like I was becoming invisible." The words stung, but there was a kernel of truth in them. I had been working long hours trying to provide for us, and perhaps I had neglected her emotional needs, but that didn't excuse her actions. "So you found someone else to talk to?" I asked, my tone accusatory. "Someone who made you feel seen?" Joyce looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Yes. It started out innocently. We would talk, and he made me feel important, valued. I didn't realize how far things had gone until it was too late." I shook my head, unable to fathom the depth of her betrayal. "How far did things go, Joyce?" I asked, needing to know the full extent of her infidelity. She hesitated, her lips trembling. We became intimate," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The confirmation of my worst fears hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt sick, my stomach churning with a mix of rage and despair. "How could you do this to us?" I asked, my voice breaking. "To our marriage?" Joyce's tears flowed freely, and she reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away, the hurt too fresh, too raw. "I don't have an excuse, David," she said, her voice filled with anguish. "I was selfish and stupid. I didn't think about the consequences, about how much it would hurt you." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps she truly regretted her actions. "Do you still have feelings for him?" I asked, needing to know if there was any chance of salvaging our relationship. Joyce shook her head vehemently. "No. Whatever I felt for him was nothing compared to what I feel for you. I was confused and lost, but I know now that I want to be with you. Only you." Her declaration brought a brief moment of solace, but the betrayal still loomed large. "If that's true, why did you continue seeing him?" I asked, my voice laced with bitterness. Joyce sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I was afraid, David. Afraid of what would happen if I stopped. Afraid of facing the reality of my actions. But now I see that I've already caused the worst kind of damage." I leaned back, trying to process everything she had said. The foundation of our marriage, built on trust and honesty, had been shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. "You should have come to me, Joyce," I said, my voice softening. "We could have worked through your feelings together." Joyce nodded, her expression one of profound regret. "I know, and I promise, from now on, I'll be honest with you about everything. No more secrets." The sincerity in her voice gave me a glimmer of hope, but I knew that rebuilding our relationship would take time and effort from both of us. "I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again," I admitted, my heart heavy with the weight of her betrayal. "But I'm willing to try, if you are." Joyce reached out again, and this time I didn't pull away. She clasped my hand in hers, her grip firm and reassuring. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes, David. I love you, and I want to make this right." The pain of her infidelity still lingered, but in that moment I realized that perhaps, with honesty and communication, we could find a way to move forward. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for the first time since Joyce's confession, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. We sat there in the dim light, holding hands, and I knew that the journey to rebuild our relationship had just begun. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to take the first step towards healing. The atmosphere in our living room grew increasingly heavy as Joyce prepared to reveal the full extent of her betrayal. Her face was etched with guilt and remorse, her eyes red from crying. The weight of her confession hung between us, an almost tangible barrier that threatened to suffocate us both. "David," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you everything." I steeled myself for what was to come, my heart pounding in my chest. "Go on," I said, my voice cold and distant, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Joyce took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "It wasn't just a few innocent meetings," she confessed. We became intimate. It went further than I ever intended or imagined it would." Her words sliced through me like a knife. I felt a surge of nausea as the reality of her actions set in. "Intimate?" I echoed, my voice filled with disbelief and pain. "How could you do this to us, Joyce? To our marriage?" Joyce looked away, unable to meet my gaze, her face contorted with sorrow. "I don't have an excuse, David. I was weak, and I let my loneliness and insecurities drive me into his arms. It was a terrible mistake, one that I regret deeply." The anger and hurt welled up inside me, threatening to spill over. "Who is he?" I demanded, needing to know the identity of the man who had come between us. Joyce hesitated, her lips trembling. "He's someone from work. We started talking, and before I knew it, things escalated. I should have stopped it, but I didn't." The thought of her with someone else, sharing moments of intimacy that should have been ours alone, was almost too much to bear. I clenched my fists, trying to control the rage building within me. "Did you ever think about me? About us?" I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. Joyce's tears flowed freely now, her sobs shaking her entire body. "Of course I did, David. I thought about you every day, and every day I felt more and more ashamed. But I was trapped in a web of my own making, and I didn't know how to get out." Her words did little to soothe the ache in my heart. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. "How many times?" I asked, needing to know the extent of her infidelity. Joyce's face crumpled, and she looked as though she might collapse under the weight of her guilt. "A few times," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It never should have happened, but it did." The room felt like it was closing in on me. Each word she spoke was like another blow, deepening the chasm between us. "A few times," I repeated, the reality of her confession hitting me hard. "How could you keep this from me? How could you come home to me every night, knowing what you had done?" Joyce wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her expression one of utter despair. "I was living a lie, David, and every day it ate away at me. I wanted to tell you, but I was terrified of losing you." Her fear of losing me felt like a cruel irony. She had already lost me the moment she chose to betray our vows. "Well, you have lost me," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "At least the version of me that trusted you implicitly." Joyce's sobs grew louder, and she reached out to touch me, but I recoiled, the pain too great. "Please, David," she begged. "I know I've hurt you deeply, but I want to make this right. I want to earn back your trust if you'll let me." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, but the damage had been done. Trust, once broken, is incredibly hard to rebuild. "I don't know if that's possible," I said, my voice hollow. "You've shattered the foundation of our relationship. How can we ever go back to the way things were?" Joyce shook her head, her eyes filled with determination despite her tears. "We can't go back," she admitted, "but we can move forward. I know it won't be easy, and it will take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends." Her words hung in the air, a fragile promise that seemed almost impossible to believe. "Do you still have feelings for him?" I asked, needing to know if there was any lingering connection between them. Joyce shook her head vehemently. "No, David. Whatever I felt for him was fleeting and meaningless compared to what I feel for you. I was confused and lost, but now I know that I want to be with you, and only you." The pain of her betrayal still burned deep within me, but there was a small part of me that wanted to believe her, to hope that we could somehow find a way to heal. "It will take a lot more than words to fix this," I said, my voice softening slightly. "You'll have to show me through your actions that you're truly committed to rebuilding our relationship." Joyce nodded, her expression one of profound regret and determination. "I understand, David, and I will. I promise you, I will." As we sat there in the dim light, the silence between us was filled with the weight of her confession and the fragile hope for the future. It would be a long and difficult journey, but for the first time since Joyce had revealed her betrayal, I felt a glimmer of possibility. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, and there would be no easy fixes. But perhaps with time and effort we could find a way to move forward together. The conversation took a darker turn as Joyce, her face still wet with tears, revealed another layer of her betrayal. "David," she said hesitantly, "there's more I need to tell you." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, dreading what was coming next. "What now, Joyce?" I asked, my voice edged with frustration and pain. She took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. He asked me to go away with him, to Las Vegas." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. I stared at her, incredulous. "Las Vegas? You're planning to run off with him?" My voice rose with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Joyce shook her head, her expression one of desperation. "I haven't decided yet, David. I told him I needed time to think." The room seemed to close in around me as I grappled with this new revelation. "You're seriously considering it?" I asked, the pain evident in my voice. "After everything we've been through, you're actually thinking about leaving me for him?" Joyce looked down, her hands trembling in her lap. "It's not that simple," she said quietly. "I'm confused and scared. I don't know what to do." My mind raced, trying to process the idea of Joyce leaving me for another man. The thought was almost too much to bear. How can you even think about this, Joyce? I demanded. How can you throw away everything we've built together for a fling? Joyce's tears flowed anew, her voice shaking with emotion. It's not just a fling, David. He made me feel alive again, like I mattered. But I know now that it was a mistake. I just don't know how to fix this. Her words stung, a painful reminder of the distance that had grown between us. So what are you going to do? I asked, my voice filled with a mixture of anger and despair. Are you going to Las Vegas with him or not? Joyce looked up at me, her eyes filled with anguish. I don't want to lose you, David, she said, her voice breaking. But I need time to think, to figure out what I really want. The intensity of the situation reached a boiling point, and I felt a surge of frustration. Time to think? I echoed, my voice rising. You've had plenty of time to think while you were sneaking around behind my back. Now you need to make a decision. Joyce sobbed openly, her body shaking with the force of her emotions. I know I've hurt you deeply, David, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please give me a chance to make things right. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The pain of her betrayal was almost unbearable, but I knew that I needed to hear her out. What do you need to figure out, Joyce? I asked, my voice calmer but still filled with hurt. Do you love him? Joyce shook her head vehemently. No, David, I don't love him. I was confused and lost, but my feelings for him were never real. I was just trying to escape my own feelings of inadequacy. Her admission brought a flicker of hope, but the road to forgiveness was still a long one. So what now? I asked, needing to know where we stood. Are you staying or going? Joyce looked at me, her eyes filled with determination. I want to stay, David. I want to fix this, to rebuild our relationship. But I need you to understand that it won't be easy. I'll need your help, your support. I sighed, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. This isn't just about you needing my support, Joyce, I said. This is about you proving that you're committed to making things right. I can't go through this alone. Joyce nodded, her expression one of profound regret and resolve. I understand, David, and I promise you, I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. The conversation had reached a pivotal moment, a crossroads that would determine the future of our relationship. All right, I said finally, my voice steady. But know this, Joyce. If you ever betray me again, there will be no second chances. Joyce's tears flowed anew, but this time there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I understand, David, and I promise you, I will never hurt you again. As we sat there in the aftermath of her confession, the road ahead seemed daunting and uncertain. But for the first time since Joyce had revealed her betrayal, I felt a small flicker of hope. The journey to rebuild our relationship would be long and difficult, but with honesty, effort, and commitment, perhaps we could find a way to heal. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, we both resolved to try, to take the first steps towards forgiveness and rebuilding the trust that had been broken. The intensity of our conversation reached its peak as the reality of Joyce's betrayal set in. My heart pounded with a mixture of rage, pain, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. How could you do this to us, Joyce? I demanded, my voice shaking with emotion. How could you throw away nearly 7 years of marriage for some fleeting thrill? Joyce's face crumpled, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't have an excuse, David, she sobbed. I was selfish and stupid. I lost sight of what really mattered. I could feel the anger rising within me, a tidal wave of hurt and frustration. You didn't just lose sight, Joyce. You destroyed the trust we built together. You made a mockery of our vows. Joyce's sobs grew louder, but I couldn't stop. The words poured out of me, each one filled with the pain I felt. Do you have any idea what you've done? How much you've hurt me? She tried to speak, but I cut her off. No, let me finish. You say you felt invisible, lonely, neglected. But instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you ran to someone else. You betrayed me, Joyce. You betrayed us. The room seemed to close in around us, the silence after my outburst deafening. Joyce wiped her tears, her face pale and stricken. I know, David. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. But please, give me a chance to make things right. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and cold. Make things right? How do you propose we do that, Joyce? By pretending this never happened? By sweeping your affair under the rug? Joyce shook her head, her eyes filled with desperation. No, David. I want to face this head on. I want to go to counseling, to work on our issues together. I want to prove to you that I'm committed to us. Her words, though sincere, felt like too little. Too late. The trust had been shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. Counseling? I echoed, the idea sounding almost laughable. Do you really think a few therapy sessions can fix this? Can erase the image of you with another man from my mind? Joyce's expression was one of profound sorrow. I don't know if it can fix everything, David, but I have to try. We have to try, if there's any hope of saving our marriage. I looked at her, the woman I had loved and trusted, now a stranger who had broken my heart. And what if I can't? I asked, my voice trembling. What if I can't get past this? Joyce's eyes widened with fear, her tears flowing anew. Please, David, don't say that. I can't imagine my life without you. I know I've made a terrible mistake, but I love you. I always have, and I always will. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, but the wound was too fresh, the pain too raw. Love isn't enough, Joyce, I said quietly. Love doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't rebuild trust. The room fell silent again, the weight of my words hanging between us. Joyce took a deep breath, her expression one of determination despite her tears. Then let me prove it to you, David. Let me show you that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends. I'll cut off all contact with him. I'll be completely transparent. I'll go to counseling. Just, please, don't give up on us. Her plea was heartfelt, but I knew that the road to recovery would be long and arduous. If we're going to try this, Joyce, you need to understand something, I said, my voice firm. There can be no more lies, no more secrets. You need to be an open book. And if I ever find out that you've lied to me again, even about the smallest thing, it's over. No second chances. Joyce nodded vigorously, her eyes filled with hope. I understand, David. I promise, no more lies. I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust. I took a deep breath, the enormity of the situation weighing heavily on my shoulders. All right, I said finally. We'll try. But know this, Joyce, it's going to take a long time, and it won't be easy. But if you're truly committed, then so am I. The decision to try and rebuild our marriage was a drastic one, filled with uncertainty and doubt. But in that moment, I realized that despite the pain and betrayal, a part of me still loved Joyce and wanted to believe in the possibility of redemption. As we sat there, the weight of our decision hanging between us, I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps, with time and effort, we could find a way to heal and move forward together. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time since Joyce's confession, I felt a glimmer of possibility, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. As our conversation reached a tentative conclusion, I found myself overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. The hurt, anger, and betrayal still coursed through me, but there was also a small spark of hope ignited by Joyce's pleas for another chance. Yet, I needed to do something tangible, something symbolic, to express the gravity of what had happened and the state of our relationship. That night, I went to the attic and retrieved an old dusty box that had once belonged to my grandfather. Inside was a small wooden coffin, intricately carved and lined with velvet. It was something he had crafted himself, a family heirloom that had always seemed a bit morbid, yet strangely beautiful. Now it seemed fitting. I brought the coffin downstairs and placed it on the dining table, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. Joyce watched me, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. "David, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked over to the drawer where we kept important documents and pulled out our marriage license. Holding the license in my hands, I felt a rush of memories flood back. Our wedding day, the vows we made, the promises of a life built on trust and love. All of it seemed so far away now, tainted by the betrayal and pain that had seeped into our lives. I walked back to the table, my steps heavy with the weight of what I was about to do. "This," I said, holding up the marriage license, "is a symbol of the life we promised each other, a life that has been shattered." Joyce's eyes filled with tears again, and she shook her head, her hands reaching out as if to stop me. "David, please don't do this. We can fix this. I promise you we can." I shook my head, the pain evident in my voice. "I need to do this, Joyce. I need you to understand the depth of what you've done." With that, I carefully placed the marriage license inside the coffin and closed the lid. The sound of the lid closing felt like a final nail in the coffin of our relationship, a symbolic gesture that signified the end of the trust and bond we once shared. Joyce broke down completely, her sobs echoing through the room. "David, no, please," she cried. "I'm so sorry. I love you. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you more than anything." Her words, filled with genuine remorse, pierced through the fog of my anger and hurt. I looked at her, seeing the woman I had loved for so many years, now broken and repentant. For a long moment, I stood there, the silence between us filled with the weight of my gesture. Joyce's cries eventually subsided into quiet sobs, and she looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Please, David," she whispered, "don't let this be the end of us. I know I've hurt you deeply, but I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Her sincerity and the raw emotion in her voice stirred something within me. I realized that despite everything, I still loved her. The road to forgiveness would be long and fraught with challenges, but perhaps this symbolic gesture didn't have to be the end. Perhaps it could be a turning point, a catalyst for a new beginning. Taking a deep breath, I walked over to the coffin and opened the lid. Joyce watched me, her breath catching in her throat. I took out the marriage license, holding it up for both of us to see. "This represents our past," I said softly. "A past that has been marred by betrayal. But it doesn't have to define our future." Joyce's eyes widened with a glimmer of hope, and she stood up, moving closer to me. "David, does this mean—" I nodded, my own eyes filling with tears. "It means I'm willing to try, Joyce. I'm willing to give us a chance to rebuild, but it will take time and a lot of effort. We have to be honest with each other, and we have to work together to heal." Joyce nodded fervently, tears streaming down her face. "I promise you, David, I will do everything in my power to make things right. I won't let you down again." In that moment, I felt a tentative sense of reconciliation. The symbolic gesture of placing our marriage license in the coffin had served its purpose, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. We stood there holding each other, both knowing that the journey ahead would be difficult, but also realizing that we had taken the first step toward healing. As we embraced, I whispered softly, "Let's take it one day at a time, Joyce. We'll rebuild our trust and our love, brick by brick." Joyce nodded, her face buried in my shoulder. "One day at a time," she agreed. And with that, we began the long process of mending our broken relationship, united by a renewed commitment to each other and a hope for a better future.